Thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming to our talk. And this talk will be presented jointly between myself and John. And I will present first the merits of using competitive simulation in brand positioning. And then John will demonstrate that merit of doing a combined methodology from competitive simulation in market research and the benefits of that, how we have done that at Life Science Dynamics. So without further ado, so welcome everybody, and it's fantastic to see everybody here in Rome. So buongiorno. So my name is Rafat Rahmani, and I'll go with the agenda. And as Suzanne said, please keep the question till the end. So the agenda is very straightforward. This is based on a number of projects we have done in brand positioning. So the agenda is a fresh look, a different look, an innovative look of brand positioning in market research, and how we can use techniques from competitive intelligence, which is competitive simulation, which is also known as wargaming, to elevate that brand positioning even higher. And we will demonstrate this by a real life case study, and that case study will be was in oncology, but we have done a number of that, but we just, given the time, we have just used one. And the practical tips. And what are the practical tips of using competitive simulation in market research, and the recap of the key takeaways. So I just want to see, show of hands, how many of you have been involved with positioning study from market research? Both as a vendor, and so pretty good. And can you crystallize why the brand positioning is so important for any success of any asset or brand? Suzanne, why brand positioning is so critical, getting the right brand positioning?
Well, it's good for ROI directly. So that's financial, but also to be able to target the right consumer or help that pressure.
Very good. So this is so the reason for brand positioning is, as Suzanne says, is to help us to do the brand recall. Ultimately, in marketing, our objective is to increase the loyalty. And if you have a very crystal clear brand positioning, it helps us to get the brand loyalty and help us to compete the brand other than on price. So other values that embodies that brand. And the brand positioning and brand promise go hand in hand. So if you look at some of the very famous, I'll give you an example of, let's say, Amazon Prime, you know their brand promises that you will get it next day. And the brand positioning is very much about getting the best price next day. If you look at the pizza, Domino's Pizza, you get it there in 30 minutes. So it is very, very important to get the two together very correctly. And this also helps us to build emotional connections with our consumer, or in our case, with our physicians. And it takes away from price-based competition to value-based competition, which is all helps with ROI. And any successful brand has to have a consistent brand positioning message around. So if you look at this particular our example, so this is a traditional methodology, and what we are proposing is one of the workshops to be replaced by competitive simulation. So in a traditional market research methodology, you will have both qualitative to do the exploratory research, discover, and it will be usually qualitative IDIs. In good old days, we would do it in central location where we will test the field material and so that we can on the fly change the field materials in the central location. But now obviously post pandemic things have changed in terms of virtual IDIs. But it will define the basic parameters, and after that, once you have the hypothesis developed through qualitative, we would have initially a workshop so that it will feed into quantitative research, because quantitative research is expensive, it's much bigger. We do not have room for making any errors, so we want to make sure that we have done groundwork with qual, so the quant goes into much more precision. And then we will have a workshop report, and then you will have analysis, tool building, so it's like a typing tools, so that which type of physician would be open to which kind of messaging, and then the final workshop and the option call methodology. So what we are saying that we can replace this initial workshop and the final workshop with a competitive simulation workshop. And so just to give a quick introduction, what is a competitive simulation workshop? So this has come to business from traditionally war game, which have been around for thousands of years. And you have read that many times smaller armies, the smaller military has been able to outmaneuver and win because of this simulation, wargaming, and strategy. So the wargaming underpins the strategy. So this just gives you an sorry, page didn't move, sorry, it's slowed down one day. So competitive simulation helps the business to make long-term decisions about things like their business model and competitive strategy, and pressure testing them in an environment that is much more controlled, risk-free, and low cost. So if you know your competitors and scenario, who should we play this competitive simulation? So this is, you have uncertainty of complexity and planning horizon if you look at it. And we have to define who should we play, where should we play, and what will be the game. So this is just to give you a quick introduction of where the competitive simulation sits with the strategy workshop with the scenario planning. And competitive simulation or workshop design principles are that you will have a home team, which is, let's say in case of company A, so this is a home team, company A, and this company is competing with 2 or 3 competitors, so company A, B, C. And the idea is that you have a multidisciplinary team and you divide them, and there is a pre-reading and conditioning each of those sub-team members to think like company A, B, and C in terms of so that they can imagine what would that company A and B, C do. And then, before pandemic, we would run typically over 2 days. But in pandemic, we also did on virtual half days through Zoom and other tools that we have. And you will invite commercial teams, you will invite medical, MSLs, and market access, and potentially other teams. And then they will have the critical success factors, cross-functional teams, other things. And the thing that will be, workshop will be designed depending on the objective of each project, and you would have red team or blue team, you will have unique selling proposition, essential statement, and we will test the positioning, and run different scenarios and how the scenarios will change if some of the parameters changes, and we will manage the requirements. But the key important is that you have a fantastic thinking process and planning process, as well as a fantastic moderators to help facilitate all this going forward. So going forward, I'm going to use a short form CSW, is alternative approach to challenge organizations and to uncover market positioning through competitive actions. So you would have a example market research output would be you would have a workshop, we will have output, which will be, you will define some segment that will resonate, we will have a characteristic of the segment, we'll have the behavior and attitude, and stated and unstated unmet needs or messaging theme, how they will be receptive to that different messaging theme. When we will do that, we do that with potential workshop, we refine the segment definition to a higher level. The whole thing is that we are elevating the traditional market research with CSW. We'll assign the segment priority and attack strategy. We'll unpack the behavior of the physicians and attitude and potential positioning. And also we'll align the internal stakeholders. and to buy into the positioning. Because at the moment when this research comes, some of the dominant people with experience, they might discount the research because of egos or whatever that might be. But this helps us to all align and stitch and mesh together. And the people you would invite, depending on the objective, is brand team, national and regional salesmen. Usually we run the workshop would be have 40 to 50 participant, cross-functional team from global and regional to cement the ideas and solidify the ideas. And CSW helps succeeding in competitive world. We are living in a very, very fast-moving, rapid, competitive environment. The world is moving quickly and without making costly mistake, because we do not have the second chance. So it's better to run the scenarios and simulation and pressure test things in a controlled environment where will minimize your risk. So a well-designed, so the design phase of a competitive simulation is critical. A well-designed simulation is very powerful to share, assess, discuss, and align. So one of the challenges with market research is that market research department goes and does the market research, and many other functions do not align. Because in a typical CSW, we would invite 40 to 50 people, cross-functional team members. In that 1 day or 2 days, one of the purpose of that is to align them. I'm looking at time, we started 5 minutes late, so I'm going to quickly pass over to John. But the purpose of the workshop is to pressure test different scenarios and things like that. The segment has to be relevant, has to be unique, has to be actionable and defendable. So with that, I'll pass to John, and I'll come back to at the end.
So thank you, Rafat. Can everyone hear me okay? So great. What I'd like to do is build on what Rafat was talking about, which is this use of CSWs, competitive simulation workshops, and show you a real-life example. So I'll show you some market research slides. We'll go quickly through them, and then we'll link how we use the market research in a workshop, a competitive simulation workshop, and then what it meant in terms of some learnings, and then we'll take your questions. So that's our flight plan. The case study, just to summarize, you see it on the slide here, but essentially it's an oncology study with specialists, oncologists and hematologists. And it's in the area of basically HL, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and anaplastic large cell lymphoma. So kind of niche areas, not broad stream oncology. It was a study where you see it was geographically diverse, Europe, South American countries, and then some Asian markets. And the nut of this was to really look at two parameters, duration of therapy and number of cycles of treatment. So pretty typical. I know most of you have extensive experience in running market research studies. And then really to get to a positioning for this particular brand versus competitors. And then to do some physician segmenting, typical quintile approach of a spectrum of receptiveness to this particular brand. This slide shows you those different segments, and I know you've all seen these kind of quintile approaches where you have from left to right different receptivities, if you will, to use the therapies. Neutral is kind of in the middle where it says Novus is there. And you can see some of this is based on attitudes, knowledge, perceptions, the classic, and some of this is based on the healthcare system, whether or not in those particular markets there were constraints. And usually these were access constraints, pricing, reimbursement, those kinds of things. Okay, everyone with me? Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. This is an example of how this market research was analyzed. Market research actually was done in-house by the LSD team, and then we could cut the analysis just like you would many different ways. So on the left panel, you'll see an average dosage. What strikes you is the left side, the red group, which is the constrained group, having about a 16% lower dose than the other groups, and that's a function of essentially the systems that those physicians have to operate in. On the right side, you basically see kind of a spread. As you know, in some markets, Some of the groups are stronger. So if you see the first one, Brazil being higher at nearly 40% or at 40% in purple in terms of those groups that are most receptive. I think the whole gist, as you know, is using this research to understand what are the opportunities and where can we draw down and kind of shift those curves to get more physicians trialing and being users of this. There's obviously a heterogeneity between these markets. My final market research slide, so I couldn't come to a market research conference for pharma without showing you market research, is typical message testing across different messages. So the messages are on the x-axis. What you see there is plotted with the different icons, the different groups. And you can see that, again, as you test different messages or you have agencies that do this type of work, you get different spreads. The dotted line in the middle, which is a greenish, grayish color, is the mean. And you have some clear messages that don't test well. For instance, number 3. You have messages 9 and 11, which seem to do much better across a more spectrum of audience. So this is the type of market research that's typically done in positioning work, and that I think everyone here kind of nods their head and acknowledges. Where am I going with all this? So what I'd like to do is kind of pivot a little bit and show you how we use these typical market research outputs and then combine it with a competitive workshop to get a better result. So that's where we're going next. So what we've done here is we've looked at the different factors in one of these cube diagrams, and you can see the X, Y axis and the kind of a depth axis, which we'll call Z. And you see the different segments. So that purple and a darker color blue is those segments that are more receptive to the therapy. The one in the middle is more neutral, and then the ones in the lower left here are less so. I don't know, the pointer, anyways. So if we zoom in, you can see. So these are the segments here that are less receptive to treatment. And what we've done then is, rather than running a typical positioning workshop, is we've run a war game, or a competitive simulation workshop, as Rafat mentioned, and really look at how will the competitors react to the positioning. And you see that diagram on the right panel of this slide with kind of the home team and 3 competitors. Okay. The trick in doing this is getting very specific. Let me just zoom. I think the zoom function is kind of working here. Because what I want to show you is when you work through these exercises, the more granular you get, the better outputs you get. And here, there's some call-out boxes you see in terms of the USP, the unique selling proposition, and reason to RX prescribe, the value add versus existing treatments, and really getting the teams to role-play competitors and then come back as the home team across stakeholders. So it used to be in the old days, as Suzanne knows, it was really about the HCPs, then payers became more important. Now it's patients and caregivers, now it's patient association groups, it's current competitors, it's emerging competitors. So our spectrum, has really widened. And these types of exercise, if you can execute them well, you can position a product that's much more sustainable. And I'll show you some of the benefits. Okay. The other panel is then what do you do with these kind of results? You have these teams, you work as a home team. You can really plot these things, and what you see is an inverted x-axis on time, where you go from long to short term, and on the y-axis you have the impact on positioning, and you can get very granular outputs from these types of team exercises. The first one is best proven therapy using the clinical data. Second one is the outcome data. The third one was differentiating on MOA. In old days of positioning, when you do traditional positioning research, you may not get this level of specificity and granularity, and this is what makes the difference. So by combining these two things, good market research and good results and running a competitive simulation workshop, basically you're getting a winning positioning. And you're getting a positioning in this case that really has three benefits over, you're having better differentiation, more sustainable differentiation, that USP. You have better application of your messaging because you know how competitors might try to remessage you or reposition you. And you can use this and build it in your typing tool to help the account managers in the field force target the right customers. So that's the net benefits. What I'd like to do is give you a couple slides. Just, we've done a lot of these types of competitive simulation workshops, using market research outputs, using strategies, using current CI, which is, as you know, a big bulk of the business that we're in. But essentially, it's really aligning the objectives with the outputs you want to get, and then kind of working clockwise in this diagram to make sure those objectives, the design of the workshop reflects those objectives. And again, there was a big debate during COVID of do you do virtual versus in person. Of course, during COVID, it was very difficult for people to travel, so we pivoted and did a lot of virtual workshops. I'll show you some learnings from those just next. And then making sure these outputs are specific enough and actionable. And many times in our travels, we hear a lot, well, I was invited to a workshop, but I never knew what was the outputs or how we were going to implement this or actioned. And that's important you design that up front to make sure that there's simple, quick wins, simple things that can be done that get action going. Because action, when you've got a bit of a momentum, it builds on it, as you all know. These are just some tips for a virtual workshop, one of two, but they're applicable, quite frankly, to in-person workshops. And by the way, I get asked this question. My role is designing the workshops at LSD. When possible, and we did a series just late last year across Europe, and in fact, we'll be presenting that on biosimilars in the next room over the lunchtime hour. But if you have the opportunity to do an in-person workshop, you get better outputs. Virtual, you're managing time and energy, and again, engagement is much more difficult. So that's a learning. But you see some of the learnings there in terms of keeping them focused, keeping the time, no more than 3.5 or 4 hours, and designing the exercises simply. One of the tricks we use is pre-populating exercises. I'll show you that in a slide, or actually, if you're interested, you'll have to come next door. I'll show you that at the noontime presentation. And the plenum, or the big group sessions, you don't want to use technology where people are jumping around. We prefer to use the platform Zoom, which has its strengths and weaknesses, but the one thing that it has is it allows you to port people between breakout groups and the plenary automatically. So people don't have to click on anything, it just happens. So June's nodding her head. She supported me with a few workshops, or our team with a few workshops. In terms of engagement, these are some practical tips. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read off each one. I give a little bit of a plug for a platform that we use at LSD, which we think might be underutilized, and that's the iAd board. This is an online collaboration tool that allows you to really get detailed inputs and really kind of replaces, if you will, we think, advisory boards or focus groups. It's a pretty cool tool. Folks that have used it, particularly in positioning work and market access type research projects, were able to get everyone's input and different thoughts because you're not in the team dynamic where you have some people who are monopolizing discussion around a round table and that kind of thing. So that's a proprietary tool that we've rolled out, I guess, for a few years ago, or it's even longer, the iAd board tool. But if you're interested, Rafat and our colleagues here will give you much more information. What I'd like to do is wrap this up, just in the interest of time, with some key takeaways. And then I'm going to have a question for you. So I was a little cheeky with Suzanne in that I asked her, make sure you can give us a good question. But I'd like to end this presentation like Rafat did with a question to you. So these are the takeaways of coupling market research with a competitive simulation workshop. Basically, it's a much more efficient process. So you and it has an integrated approach in terms of the key stakeholders, and you're targeting different groups that I showed you of customer stakeholders. You can pressure test things and you can run simulations. We'll talk about that at noon if you're interested in how we do that with surprise scenarios. You get new insights during this process because you're role-playing your competitor and you're thinking, okay, what will happen if this data comes or these events happen? You get alignment. We feel you get stronger alignment, particularly among the 3M teams of marketing, market access, and medical. And at the end, you have basically an improved brand positioning, so you have better results. And that's really why I think we'd like you to consider this approach versus a standard positioning workshop in market research. So what I'd like to do is just show a kind of a raise of hands. Who would consider running a competitive simulation workshop when they're looking at segmentation and positioning research in the future? Did I convince you? 2 people. Thank you. 3 people. Okay. I invite Rafat back up here. I'm going to take this microphone and move here, and I think we have a couple minutes for any questions. Yeah.
Well, we've done well because we started 5 minutes late, and if you have... No. All right. Yeah, so any question for me or John?
There, thank you.
Yes, so you mentioned about doing the simulation. Is there any particular type of drug class or whatever which this is more suited to? So, would it be more suited, say, to biosimilars? Would it be more suited to a very originator?
I think it depends on how competitive how competitive market is, and in this particular case, it was very, very competitive area. So there's no, a great positioning is needed for whether it's biosimilar or branded drug.
And just as a follow-up to that, you mentioned during your presentation about the sustainable impact of the position. What does that mean?
Well, so the position and market is dynamic and it will change. So because the market research is done in a static time and it is a recall of the message, so it's very static of one snapshot at a time. Whereas in CSW, we are running the simulation and under different scenarios. So therefore, it's much more future-proof. And we are looking more, okay, here was the market and we are going forward. So if you remember that planning horizon, so we are looking at minimum 2 to 3 years, sometimes 5 years in the future. So when we say sustainable advantage, this is what we're meaning. I think there's a question in the back. Hi, sorry, could you state your name, please?
Yeah, so this is Matt Higgins from InCrowd. My question is, so at InCrowd, we do a lot of agile market research. So I was wondering, how does CSW fit into an agile approach or methodology, if it does at all?
Well, if you look at the methodology, usually there will be a workshop to disseminate post-qualitative research to make before going to the quant. So from that way, it doesn't make a huge difference. The only challenge is booking 40 to 50 people calendar is the biggest challenge. Getting everybody. We have seen so many of CSW being postponed because people cannot get their calendars aligned.
It's a good question, Matt, and I think it can be incorporated, I guess, into an agile market research stream. And one of the main benefits is the better outcome at the end that I mentioned in terms of your positioning. So basically, you're almost killing 2 birds with 1 stone, if I use the British analogy of you're really looking at how competitors will react as well as improving the positioning from an internal perspective. Good.
Thank you.
We're tight on time, so I think Suzanne is going to kick us off stage, and we're off to something else. Thank you so much for your attention.